You're about to meet the innovators and influencers who are restoring the Judeo-Christian foundations of our culture right here on The Patrick Coffin Show.
And now, here's your host, Patrick Coffin.
Welcome to this edition of The Patrick Coffin Show. I am Patrick Coffin. Todd Komarnicki is a New York-based writer, director, and producer. Chances are excellent you've either laughed or cried or sat riveted during one of his movies, like the Christmas gem Elf, starring Will Ferrell, which Todd produced. He also adapted Captain Chesley Sullenberger's autobiography into the movie Sully, starring Tom Hanks, directed by a guy called Clint Eastwood. Todd also co-wrote The Professor in the Madman, now in post-production, starring Mel Gibson and Sean Penn. More important than all of that good stuff, Todd is also a husband and a father, and he loves Jesus. Todd, so great to talk to you, sir.
Great to see your face, Patrick.
I'll try not to get too fanboy. I loved the script that you gave me to read, and we're going to get into that. It's about, to me, the making of the greatest film ever made, It's a Wonderful Life. But before we jump there, I want to just share with people how I first got connected with you, and that's through my dear friend, Phil Cook. My wife and I were at a meeting with Phil a few months ago in Burbank, and I told Phil about my National Review essay called The Little Story That Did about Philip Van Doren Stern, and he goes, stop right there. You have to talk to Todd. Who's Todd? Oh, my friend Todd Komarnicki. He's writing a movie now about the making of It's a Wonderful Life. I said, yeah, right, I'm the Easter Bunny too. And he goes, no, it's true. So that was my my intro into Komarnicki world. So, and I'm grateful to Phil for that connection.
Are you saying that you're the Easter Bunny? Did you also just slide that confession in there?
I didn't want to hide it anymore. I'm coming out as the Easter Bunny. And
I saw a white fluffy ear poking out from your headphones.
It's pink, Todd. You can just say that it's pink. It's not white.
It's hard to see on Skype. Sorry.
It is. Actually, that's a line from a Woody Allen film. I think it's maybe Zelig. The character says, no, it's not the camera, it's me, I'm out of focus. So maybe it's me, maybe I'm out of focus. Todd, how did you get into the life writing? Did you discover, a poem that you wrote when you were 7 and people freaked out that it was so good, or did you come into writing in college? What was the first bite of the bug? Well,
it involves a poem, and it did happen in college, so pretty good work there.
Okay.
Yeah, what happened was I was not someone that was pursuing the arts in any way. I was interested in broadcasting. I thought that's what I studied in college, but I quickly found that there's only about 11 ways that you can say, hey, he's going off tackle for about 7 yards, big pileup. Number 52 with the tackle. There's only so many times that's interesting, and it becomes, I was imagining a life of doing that, or standing outside at an Idaho high school football game, when you have to get your licks in first before they hire you. They always send you to these remote places where even the parents aren't at the game. Yeah. And so that's not going to happen. That's not going to float my boat. But I didn't know what I was going to get into. I wasn't pointing in any direction. And I was about to start my senior year at Wheaton College, and both my sisters had been lit majors at Wheaton. I had taken any lit because I was in the communications field. And so they said, whatever you do, take a class with Dr. Jill Baumgartner. And Jill Baumgartner is that person. She was my needle skip lady that was there when everything changed. So I took a class with her, and was a 400-level poetry writing class. And she let me into the class even though I didn't have the merits to get in. But she said, I will grade you. I'm not going to give you a chance to audit the class. You're going to have to come in and perform at the level of the students that have been studying for these 4 years. Yeah. And I didn't even know to be intimidated by that, because I was like, poetry, you get graded on poetry. I was not connected to any of the reality or the diligence it took or the shaping of language. I was completely clueless. Outside of telling jokes with my friends and trying to be quick-witted, I'd never thought about language as a tool of story or anything. I was adrift in my own collegial lostness. And this class was extraordinary because, first of all, her love and respect for language was contagious and really beautiful, and I started to really read for the first time. But at our midterm, we had to write 10 poems. And these were one haiku, one villanelle, one free verse, one sonnet, and we got them back at the first class after the midterm. And on that day, it was at the end of class, and Dr. Baumgartner dismissed the entire patchouli-smelling, 27 earring-wearing, cool kids with their papers in hand, and she asked me to stay after with my bad mullet. I was
also known as hockey hair.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I was worse than that because I'd shaved out 2 lines on each side of my head, and had the very tight on top, and then the Bono panic do in the back. It was really atrocious. I thought that was probably why she was going to ask me to stay after.
She thought it was poetic. She thought it was poetic. That's why.
Well, no, it was an anti-poem. Free haircuts in poetry class. But she instead, after everyone had left, she took the papers and she set them down in front of me. And on the cover page was, in red letter, ironically, a big circled A. And I looked up at her and she said to me, "Todd, if you want to, you can be good at this." And I said, "I want to." And that's it. That was the beginning of the rest of my life. That was the beginning of writing, of falling in love with language and crafting story. And it took me a long time to be actually any good at it. But without her spotting, as I thank her in the beginning of my first novel, I said that she was a miner of deeply hidden talent. And so she looked into a black coal mine and somehow saw the glint of a diamond and encouraged me to dig until it had a chance to shine.
Did your first novel come out whole cloth? Did you just sit down to write an outline and boom, there it was? Or was it just back to the mining metaphor? Was it like cranking through a spelunking expedition with a Bic pen? Was it hard, or was it closer to hard or closer to easy?
Well, it was a lesson. It was a cautionary tale, really, because when I decided to write it, it did come in one big blur. And when I was done, I was convinced that it was fantastic. So I gave it to my sister, Kristen, and she's the only reason it actually ever became a book, because she just destroyed it. I went up to Toronto where she was studying, and we sat for hours. And in fact, she had warned me before I got there that I was probably only going to wind up with about 50 pages of a 300-page book.
Yeah.
And I got up there, and she was reading out loud. This is a great move. If you want to convince someone that they need editing, she would read my sentences out loud, and then we would burst into hysterical laughter, because what I thought was so cogent and hip and interesting was actually just bad and laugh out loud funny. So I laughed more during the hours of being told I was terrible than I have any other time in my life. And she was right. I wound up with about 53 pages survived. And I started over again. And on the other side of that, I sent it woefully and carefully to her. And she said, "You got it. You got it." We did a little more crafting, but that was the courage she had to tell her little brother that he'd done terribly when he thought he'd done well. Those kind of brave moves, that's what every artist needs.
It could have had a worse outcome, because normally when writers tell that story, their family members, "Oh, follow your passion, which could be the worst advice ever if you're sucky at it. But normally family members are, "Oh, this is wonderful," but then you get kicked in the soldiers by an agent or, a producer. But she had the courage to tell you the truth, and that it sounds like it freed you up to not worry about being terrible, because terrible is another word for dress rehearsal for good, and good is a dress rehearsal for great. Is that how you interpreted it? It's okay that the first draft is super poop?
Forget the first draft. I mean, the first several years of your life are going to be terrible. They are. You have everybody. And of course, there's the one-off. There's somebody that wrote something when they were 19 and somehow it's brilliant. It does happen. It's anomalous.
Yeah.
But the key is to understand that everybody has a certain amount of bad writing in them, and they've got to get it out of their system. What they're going to find out on the other side of that bad writing is that they're either still bad, or they're okay, or they're on their way towards something. And it's a craft. I mean, I'm 51 years old, and the gift of my career is that now, instead of being retired for the last 15 years from a sport, I'm actually in the center of my career. I'm at the prime. I understand it more than I ever have. And I still feel like a baby. I still feel like I'm on the letter C or the letter D of the alphabet of what it takes to be a writer. But I'm encouraged because I keep slowly getting higher up the mountain, and that feels really good. Was hearing that Elf was going to actually get greenlit and go off the ground, was that like getting jumped from base camp to halfway up Everest? That must have been huge. Well, that, getting into producing was just happening because I got sick of selling scripts that the studios don't make. They just back then, there was about a 10% rate of purchased and hired scripts that became movies. Now it's like 3%.
Yep.
It just movies, aside from the juggernauts like the Star Wars and the Spider-Mans, the rest of the movies, it's really difficult to get it into the slipstream. So I got into producing because I wanted to have more chances to get movies made. And we worked on Elf for a long time. We developed it, and we worked very closely with Jon Favreau, the director, and some other writers rewriting it. So that was a 7-year process. So by the time it occurred, it actually felt organic as opposed to, oh my goodness, this is a rocket to the moon. Yeah. It felt like we were tilling the earth for so long, and a tree grew. You're like, yeah, it ought to grow. That's some good soil.
Yeah, so it was the anti-flash in the pan.
Yes.
I would think that casting for a film like that is so central to the magic of it. I'm trying to think of other comic actors, and Will Ferrell so incarnated Buddy that it's very hard to envision it working so well without his big little naivete, sweet thing, you know?
Yeah, that was the conviction of my producing partner, John Berg, who turned to me one day and to the writer David Berenbaum and said, we need to go all in on Will Ferrell. And at that point, Will had only done one movie, and that was Night at the Roxbury, which had not performed. He was known primarily as an SNL actor. And so it was a risk. You didn't know that the marketplace was ready for him. We got him attached, and he was amazing. And then we took it all over town, and it was true. They were not ready to make a Will Ferrell movie, and they were not ready to make a Christmas movie. Everybody told us nobody wants to see a Christmas movie. So finally, New Line Cinema had a couple of young execs who had come from Comedy Central, and they adored Will Ferrell. They were like, whatever it takes to get Will Ferrell in a movie. So they brought us on. I don't think necessarily that this was going to be his next thing, because it took years for us to develop it. But they definitely were sold in the way we were for Will. It's just a perfect marriage of character, and he never breaks. That's the key. The key to that character is that New York doesn't break him. His light breaks and sets free New York. And in order for that to work, you need Will to hold on to that light the entire time with total purity and innocence. And that's the genius of the performance, because that's really hard to do. To not go cynical, to not go for the quick, easy joke. Yeah. The bulk of comedy now is comedy of humiliation and a kick in the crotch and, laughing at others. And Will just held on to the integrity of the character that was on the page. And I think that's why the movie has stuck around.
It's unironic to the end, which is its secret sauce. Did you find it hard to let the writer write and do his job, since you had written so many scripts that kind of at least left the tarmac? Or did you, as a producer, just decide, I'm going to be the guy with the baton, I'll do some hiring and gather a team? Did you feel a bit like the father of a middle school hockey player who wants to get in and try to help a little bit?
Well, on Elf, that question has two responses. On Elf, no, because David Berenbaum, and then he couldn't write on it any further because he got a deal at Disney, so he was exclusive to Disney. But then Favreau wrote on it, and then Adam McKay, who has gone on to become a legendary filmmaker, he wrote on it, and then Will's presence is always there, and then Scott Armstrong wrote on it, and so everybody that was touching the script was phenomenally gifted. Yeah, and there was no question that the script was improving, and of course they were great at taking notes, and that was a very fun experience. The disheartening thing that happens far too often is that you run into writer fatigue. You run into writers that aren't used to going back to the well again and again and again, and usually it takes 1,000 drafts, and you want it to be with the same writer, but I don't know, not every writer A, has the skill to rewrite, or B, more centrally, has the desire to stick it out to the end. Yeah. If you want to be precious about your words, go into playwriting and write novels, and when you think you're done, then you're done. Especially now in the self-publishing world, and that's all fine. But if you're in the movie business, it's totally collaborative, and if someone says you're not done, you're not done. And you don't have to agree with the note, but collectively you have to fight for the third way and figure it out together. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But I would encourage young writers to just completely dispose of the notion of this is the draft. How many times do we get a submission that's like, I did it, we nailed it, this is the one. You know they're lying. They're lying to themselves, and it's never going to be the one. We fix stuff in post. We add dialogue off camera. You'd be amazed when you look at movies, key moments in movies where it was a completely added line on the back of an actor looping in some motivational thing that sets the rest of the movie in motion. So that's common. It's actually common.
A lot of your work has been adapting previous stories or in the case of Sully, autobiographies. Would you say that adapting material is simultaneously really hard and really easy? Hard because you've got, let's say, 400 pages, 500 pages, whatever it is. You have to distill, find the moments that are going to work for a 120-page document called a script. But easy in the sense that it's already a country. You have to shape it into another country that kind of works. This is going to a question. Are there some criteria that have to, some checklisted things have to happen before you'll go all in and devote, I mean, 7 years in the case of Elf. What adapting material are you drawn to? What kinds of stories go, okay, I'm firing on all my pistons here? Do they all have one thing in common?
You Trojan horsed a question in there in the beginning, which was, is it harder? And so that my answer to that is sort of like when kids say, how long is the script? And you say 120 pages, and they're like, 120 pages, it just seems impossible. Yeah. Those, or a 400-page novel or whatever, the notion of hardness, it's just too abstract to answer because it's not measurable. And you have to put in the work regardless. Is it harder raising a daughter or a son? It's just
the answer is yes.
Yeah, the answer is yes. Exactly. So that is just what it is, and each project carries its own difficulties. That's just normal. What I love about adapting is finding the secrets that are always hidden inside what seems to be really overt. This works especially well when the person you're talking about is alive. So, for instance, with Sully, he would say things in the book, and I would have that as proof, which I could certainly use in the movie script, but I'm able to go to him and say, you mentioned this one thing that happened in Oklahoma. And it unleashes the story that really didn't belong in the book, but is so fascinating and so central to who he is that it becomes a defining characteristic in the movie. So again, we go back to mining. I mean, just digging into a person's reality, their openness, their vulnerability. Sully was an extraordinary partner to work with. He was so honest and real, didn't hold back. He easily could have. He could have tried to shape it any way he wanted, but he allowed us to be told about how vulnerable he felt in the aftermath of the event. So none of that would have been possible without Sully's cooperation.
So many different ways to bounce the ball based on what you just said. You've talked in other conversations about the fact that you don't like flashbacks. They're kind of the lazy man's out. And I've heard you use the term the eternal now theory.
Sure.
And just flesh that out a little bit. It's a very interesting thing because if you think of God as the author, we're characters in God's story, his story, history. And so we're always carrying around the sum total of our memories. Where did this insight come from? How did you kind of pick this up along the way? And what is it?
I did it first in a book I wrote called Famine. And I'm fascinated with how life is constantly intersecting in an invisible way. So, for instance, you and I, leading up to the moment that we met, and you did magic tricks for my children, had probably crossed paths a handful of times, maybe even sat together in the same church service. Maybe I was in a restaurant and you walked past outside. That there's this slow spinning of our lives that leads to connection down the road. And that Famine is very much about that, the interconnectedness of all of us. And even people that we never meet, we're having an impact on through telling stories, or their cousin's favorite movie is this, or so you have impact, and we're all connected that way. So I delved deeply into it in my book Famine. That was the beginning. But as a film trope, it really is fascinating because my rule is no VO and no flashbacks. Laziness is exactly it. When you can't crack a story point, you just suddenly drop into a flashback. And oftentimes writers, if they do that a couple times in a few drafts, are like, oh no, I can't have a flashback at page 72 randomly. So now I have to pepper flashbacks wall to wall.
Yeah.
And then you have a completely different movie that's just been enslaved by the technique of using a flashback.
Yeah.
So
right.
the Eternal Now came out of that, which is what you alluded to earlier. When you and I walk into a room, when we walk into this interview, we bring with us everything that has ever happened to us. Some of it we can recall instantly. Some of it is marks and scars on our body. Most of it we have no memory of. It's just in there somewhere. It could be called to light through conversation, but for the most part, it's just in there. It's shaped who we are. Then there's this moment that we're having right now and how this moment impacts our future. So it's always eternally now. And I think because of my faith in God, each moment is infused with his glory and his imagination and his possibility and his mercy. So that makes life really electric. What it allows in storytelling is if you just push in, and you put this in the camera direction, let's say I push in to your face here in the scene from this movie, I can go into your eye, I can just drift past your shoulder, but I can go anywhere in the history of your life. I can see you when you're 8, I can see you when you're in utero, I can see you anywhere, as long as the scene returns where we started.
Yeah.
So I come back, and you're picking up the interview from that point. What that allows us to do, instead of being distanced via flashback that we've been told, we have just now gained intimacy because we know that was your memory slipstream that you allowed us to go into. So when we come out of it, we feel more intensely about you. We're worried more for you or like you less or whatever it is. But it's the ante has been upped by the experience of joining your memory, your full life. And that's the eternal now. And so Sully is loaded with that.
Aristotle said that the best synonym for knowledge is memory. Think about the things that you know. They're actually things you remember. Even if you've just learned them a moment ago, you're remembering them. You're becoming a member of them again, so to speak. Yeah, there's just so much there.
And
so much there.
How kids operate. It's the same thing. Everyone tells a story. Everyone wants to know the news. You know, we call it the news. It's a new thing.
Yeah.
New, plural. You got the news? What's going on? The gospel is the good news. We're constant. Jesus always speaking in story. This is what we want to know. We want to know what we don't know. Hey, did you hear? So I tell you a story. Or you say, I wonder if. And you hope I have the answer to that. And maybe collectively what we learn is that neither of us know, or we thought we knew, and we have to go find out another path. But it's constantly seeking knowledge. And I think if we're really humbly in touch with our ignorance and humbly in touch with the gift of curiosity, we can have unstoppable lives of rich joy and wonder. When we suffer, it's because the world is not moving according to our knowledge. Hey, this package should open. It should open. This traffic should not be here. I can't be late. I need that job. It's all these things. Control, of which we have none. So we just surrender, get out of the way, stay curious. Man, the stuff God wants to show us.
Were you raised in a Christian home? Did you encounter Christ along the way as a wayward returned kid? What was your tell me your story, your Jesus story. How did you meet him?
Well, I was raised in an incredible home. I put the lie to the David Mamet story, which is he always said, there's no such thing as a writer with a happy childhood. I had a spectacular childhood. My parents are both with the Lord now, but they raised us with love and selflessness. The home was filled with foster kids, and they were always giving, and I had 2 older sisters that were incredible. So the life of Christ was evident in front of me and how to live it. And there was Bible study, and there were all these things. I was involved. I went to church. I went to, I was first in Bible drill. I could tell you where Nahum was. I was, I was in the mix. But I remember this moment in my senior year where we were driving back from church, and I had the bulletin in my hand, and I just looked up, and somehow for the first time I noticed that it said 11 o'clock worship service. And I said to my parents, why do they call it a worship service? Which proves to me, in retrospect, I was not at church for any of the right reasons. I wasn't being a jerk, but I just was not aware of really what was going on and what it's about. And as soon as I finished high school and went to college, it took about 15 seconds for my faith to just burn away like gossamer. It had never become mine. I mean, I'd been baptized and I knew the right things to say. And I don't think I was being a charlatan, but when I went to college, it was gone in a blink.
You were looking but not seeing.
Maybe. Or maybe pretending I didn't need to look because everybody else already had it. And
Sure.
like, well, that's good. That makes sense.
Yeah.
So that, of course, when you turn your back on the living God, there's a large chasm waiting to swallow you whole, and that was what happened. So I don't want to go into it too deeply this particular time. I was very frank about it in a chapel talk I gave at Wheaton College, my 25th reunion.
Mm-hmm.
That was the first time I really talked about it. It's probably hard for me to top that. So
Sure.
that's on the internet. So if people
Sure.
want to watch it, they can definitely see that. That's my salvation story. But meeting Jesus was on the other side of choosing aggressively against him. And that's ongoing in my life to this day. I can't believe that I'm alive. I can't believe that the choices I made and the positions I put myself in, that somehow this God I rejected completely never let go of my belt.
Mm-hmm.
So my gratitude of being radically saved informs every single part of my life.
I think something you said to me in person, which kind of stuck. We were talking about the habit of some Christians to stay underground. They don't want the New York Times to say something bad. They don't want to lose a job. And your comment was, when you've been raised from the dead, you want to talk about it.
Yeah, that's right.
That's a great line. My friends and listeners know how well attached I am to It's a Wonderful Life. I've seen it every year, probably for the last 25 years. I know probably more than the average bear about the crafting of the story, and I've read everything Frank Capra has read. Yeah, that'd be 4 lifetimes. Has written. And when I read first that Phil Cook told me you were writing The Greatest Gift, and then reading your script, I read it on my little dumb phone on the plane back from New York. And I have reviewed probably, I don't know how many hundreds of scripts. I worked in creative development at a TV company and a film company, and only 2 scripts have ever made me cry, and I couldn't stop it. I couldn't help it, I should say. One was a script that's since been made into a movie starring the late Anton Yelkin. It's called Delivering Milo. And I thought, this is Capra-esque. And the other one is The Greatest Gift. It's just so lovely the way you dovetail Philip Van Doren Stern with George Bailey, and how Frank Capra ended up seeing the story, and the rejection that Philip went through over and over and over. I'm not going to say anything else except that it's just the bomb. I thank you so much for writing it. And how did you hear about the Philip Van Doren Stern angle? And because he's just the heart that beats through the whole story, and he is George Bailey in a way.
I'm gonna use profanity, so
okay.
The FCC can bleep me now. But this is a perfect example of what I believe, just a spiritual theory, which is that flowers grow in shit. Mm-hmm. And the way I got to the story was through total disappointment. I was working on a project, a very high-profile project that I'd put a lot of time into, and it was a slam dunk at the studios, and it was beautiful, and it was clearly, when we do this as Christians, it was clearly God's plan. I mean, of course he wants this. I mean, this is a movie for everybody. It's going to change the rules. And it was just set up to be, it was just obviously this is going to happen. And at the last minute, it was a massive disappointment. And it was very, very crushing. It was also at a time where I really needed a piece of good news. We'd had a dry spell. It was the post-writer strike, and things were tight. And, of course, this was going to be the good news because it would be good news for me and it would be good news for the world. And it got yanked away. There was a junior producer on that project who was in all the meetings, but I maybe talked to twice. There's a lot of people. It was a big project. And 6 months later, after this sadness, I get a call from this junior producer. And he says, I'm calling for 2 reasons, Todd. I'm calling because I had an up-close front seat to a massive disappointment. that you went through and that you shouldn't have gone through. And I just called to tell you that I really appreciate how you handled the experience. So here's this guy watching, and if I did it well, it's only by the grace of Christ. So I'm not even aware that I was like doing it right. But so he notices that, and then he says, the other reason I'm calling is, how do you feel about It's a Wonderful Life? And he said, I've just acquired the life rights of Philip Van Doren Stern's daughter. She's 78. She lives in Boston. She knows the true untold story. I said, buy me a train ticket. I'm going to Boston. So that's where it came from. And this guy had not known me and not been around me and didn't know my work or anything. So if I hadn't been in that debacle, I wouldn't have had a mind for him. And ultimately, it was this perfect fit. So I'm very grateful. And things are always like, we always try to talk about, my friends in the business, that no doesn't mean no. It just means not now. And if you're living by faith, you have this huge benefit of being a Romans 8:28 Christian, which is all things lead together for good to those that love God, called according to his purposes. So he's got it. Trust that. Not all good things are going to happen, but all things that lead together for good. So the business is relentless in telling you that. There's a lot of hope as the oxygen, and sometimes the oxygen tank gets cut off. You got to hold your breath for a while. But knowing that it's coming and knowing that he's knitting it together for good is, that brings deep peace. Was it William Goldman who said that Hollywood's the only place where you can die of encouragement? He was a genius. Yeah. Is there such a thing as a Christian movie? Or is that question itself irksome? How big can we write the words irksome? I mean, that is a fantastic question. There's art made by Christians, and there's terrible films made with a co-opted term put in front of them. I'm totally okay with faith-based. Someone wants to say it's a faith-based movie. But if you are telling me that your version of Christianity and your version of the world and your version of art wins the title, as if Christ is, it's like Nike presents, as if Christ is putting his name on your thing, I think that's a deeply arrogant thing to do, and I'm not a fan of it. But I think everybody should have the right to say they're making faith-based movies and make good ones or bad ones or whatever, make them about any faith. But yeah, I think that is an irksome problem. And it also makes people very dismissive. They hear like, oh, well, it's a Christian movie, so it's automatically bad. How could anything associated with Jesus Christ be bad? It's a tragic misnomer. Yeah, except that it is when you're talking about the movies often. I call them movies by Christians for Christians. And I'm not against them, I'm for them. But they don't really move the needle outside the believosphere. They shouldn't be allowed to be called Christian cinema. They're faith-based cinema. And they're seeking, I'm not saying they're not true in their faith, or they're not seeking Jesus. Yeah. But I think they shouldn't be allowed to co-opt the language and just make their movies the Christian ones. I could have a whole conversation with you, Todd, about how you manage your time. When you and I spent the afternoon together with your family, you told me about the Mercury 13. Stop me if I'm hitting things I'm not allowed to talk about. The David Project, The Greatest Gift, and I know there's probably 4 or 5 other things. Do you feel like the guy sipping water from a fire hydrant? How do you decide this moment and this hour I'm going to devote to this? Because the life of a producer, writer, director, it's just multi hats being taken off and put on. See, I got a fedora reference in there. Did you catch that? Or change the image, multiple plates spinning. How do you manage your time with so many great things? And you can't do all the great things with the limitedness of time. First priority is my wife and kids. That's the first thing. Everything bends around that. So if there are needs there in the family, and pick up, drop off, spend time, tuck in, date night with my wife, that is sacrosanct. Mm-hmm. So work finds its level after that. And then because I've never been busier, and I know that it's all a gift, I have to recognize that if this is the work that's come my way, that God's going to give me the strength and clarity to do it. So what I do, I start my day in prayer. I ask my wife to pray for me all the time. I ask my colleagues at work to pray for me that he would allow me to have the focus needed to execute at a high level. Because it's a little silly sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
You just want to, sometimes my wife will catch me wandering through the apartment and she'll see that 1,000-mile stare and she's like, uh-oh, you're thinking about multiple projects at once. You're not allowed to do that. Because if I do sit down with just one,
yeah,
and it's in front of me and I'm writing it, I'm not writing 2 projects at once. I'm just writing one, and that's very freeing. And that's how you execute. You only get up the mountain one step at a time.
Last question. True or false? Hollywood is run by anti-Christian bigots.
False.
You've never felt really discriminated against, huh?
Well, no, I've never felt discriminated against. People ask me what's it like to be a Christian in Hollywood, and because I was a Christian before I went to Hollywood, I don't know how to compare.
Yeah.
I just know my life, and so but they're good people and bad people in every business. You could say that if I was an oil executive, you could say,
and church.
Yeah, and church. And so the answer on the human level is yes, because there are humans in the business, there are going to be bigots and there's going to be discrimination, but not in an outsized way. And I think people are really trying to be successful. People are aiming for excellence because excellence gets rewarded. That's how you stick around. There obviously are things that I don't avail myself of. So if I were into certain behaviors, I'm sure that that's available to me in LA, but I think that would be available in Houston or Albuquerque or anywhere. Yeah. Because it's a fallen world we live in. Yeah. So no, it's not Hollywood's not a big, bad, scary place that's got some master plan to destroy us all. Not that I've seen.
Just some of us. Those of us who claim to be the Easter Bunny are in particular danger. What's the next thing, do you think, to hit the big screen or the small? What the thing in your pipeline that's probably going to be greenlit and appear next? Do you know?
The Greatest Gift has a lot of momentum, but we have another movie that I wrote called Ride, which is the true story of the most dangerous sporting event in the world, which is the TT motorcycle race on the Isle of Man. It's just about to happen. Your listeners should check it out on YouTube. It's the TT race. They shut down the Isle of Man, and on the regular streets, they're about as wide as a VW Bug, two-way traffic, tiny roads, motorcycle racers, the best in the world, race 200 miles an hour. And it is extraordinary. And this is the true life Rocky story about a guy very much like George Bailey in the middle of his life, dropping everything and deciding, I got to chase my dream. I've avoided it since I was a child. I've got to go chase my dream. And his dream is to race in this race. And it's a great story. Mark Gardner is still alive. He lives in Kansas City. I love him. He's such a good guy. And it's a story of redemption and healing. It's a love story. And that is getting very, very close.
Right. That's a great premise. One of those stories that will never be made into a play. Todd Komarnicki, I could spend all day, but I can't because you're busy and so am I. But I'm really honored that you carved some time out, and Godspeed. And I hope to catch up with you real soon, okay?
Hey, anytime, Patrick. You're a gentleman. Those were great questions, and you have a fantastic tie on.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, it looks so real.
It's good.
No, it's real. All right, hi to the fam. We'll catch up soon. God bless.
Peace of Christ.
All right, you as well. This is the Patrick Coffin Show. Be a saint. What else is there?